what are the socio-economic implications of regional exit coal strategies? For a long time, coal has powered and heated millions of households in industrialized countries. It has also played an important role in the development of emerging economies. However, coal is the world's biggest source of carbon emissions. Many states and cities have decided to exit coal in order to improve their carbon footprint and air quality. A coal exit has many socio-economic implications, especially for the regions that have coal mines. We need to provide solutions for regions and individuals that are most affected by the coal exit. At this time, this structural change opens up opportunities.
Now, without further ado, I'm going to start by introducing my panel. I'm Linda Davis, and I am pleased to moderate this session. We have with us Professor of Economics and Sustainability, the Hertie School of Governance, and she is also the Head of Department, Energy, Transport and Environment at the German Institute of Economic Research. We have Professor Claudia Kemfert. Did I say it right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, with us on our panel, we also have, okay, I'm mixing my cards here. We have Minister for Energy, Chile, Ms. Susana Jiménez. Wonderful. And we also have the Parliamentary Undersecretary of State, Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy of the United Kingdom, Lord Oliver Henley. Very pleased to have you with us. And then we have the Director for the Just Transition Center, International Trade Union Confederation, Samantha Smith. Thank you very much for joining us. And then seated on the my extreme left is Minister for Energy and Spatial Planning, Luxembourg, Claude Turmes. Wonderful. So we've got an excellent panel, a small panel, which means we'll be able to dig deeper into some of these ideas on how we manage the coal exit. To set us off, I would like to have Professor Kemfert take the stage and give us some opening remarks.
Yeah, thank you very much for this very nice introduction. Thanks also for having me here. I'm really pleased to talk about some aspects related to the German coal transition or coal exit. We did some studies around this, and this is why I have brought some slides with me, which I would like briefly to present. This is a joint work with, together with the technical university. Some colleagues are here. Also today we have 15 years of research related to this, and I'm just presenting a few aspects related to the coal exit and to the coal phase out, especially in Germany. But before I dive into the German segment, I wanted to stress out that if we want to reach the Paris Agreements, the emission reduction goals of 80 to 95%, by 2050, we have to keep almost all coal into the ground, not burning it. And that means 80% of lignite and hard coal, especially hard coal, needs to be left in the ground in order to meet the climate goals. And that's especially important if we are facing also the SDGs, and this phasing out coal does have many co-benefits also with the SDGs, and we have looked at the individual trade-offs, not only on the phase-out of coal, but also the phase-in of renewables. And as you can see, the phase-in of renewables brings a lot of benefits on all different kind of levels of the SDGs, but today we talk about phase-out of coal, and that means that we have to look also in the employment impacts. Electricity prices is crucial, but also the local pollution and emissions. And to our opinion, the best way of phasing out coal is phasing in renewables. And especially because we are not alone in Germany. I have now the German perspective. Around us in Europe, there are many countries phasing out coal. Not only we, Germany, as the biggest emitter, but also two different countries which are really important are phasing out also coal, and around us we see many European countries sooner or later phasing out individual aspects of coal. However, we in Germany are the biggest emitter. We have the largest amount of emissions. We have the largest amount of coal. And this is why we briefly look at two different countries, but Germany is crucial here, especially if we are talking about how to phase out coal. United Kingdom did an interesting way because they have 15 gigawatt of coal capacity. They have a minimum price of coal, of CO2 emissions, and that means they are pretty much reducing the emissions, but also the share of coal. Instead, in Germany, we increased the share of renewables by 2000 drastically, have now reached 40% of electricity production, but forgot, so to say, to decrease the share of coal. We still have a very high share of coal capacity, approximately 50 gigawatt, and depend most of it and import the coal from international markets. And this is why it's so crucial to change. And in Poland, for example, they have similar issues, but as in Germany 20 or 25 years ago, the bad mining conditions are also important, and this is why we have to look on both aspects, the local pollution, but also the change of the energy system in total. So now, as I wanted to give you a brief overview of what Germany has decided, we have 30 years of discussions behind us. We started with a renewable energy promotion system 20 years ago, but now we have decided to phase out coal after we will phase out nuclear by 2023. We phase out coal, and now a commission has decided or also recommended to go this way further. And yes, you can see since the 50s, coal has been very, very important to the German Wirtschaftswunder, we call it that way, but now has declined since 30 years almost drastically. Jobs have been declined. We started from 50,000 people in hard coal sector, and now 10,000 jobs are left, and 150,000 in lignite sector, 30,000 are left. So you see, we have already almost done a long way of structural changes, but now are doing the rest. And this is a crucial aspect why we have these very drastic discussions. We still have a very high share of coal, approximately 40% of the electricity system is still based on coal, and this is why it's so crucial to change the whole system. And now we have recommended to go on different phases. The first phase out is to phase out of coal is to reduce the most inefficient and oldest coal power plants in the first phase, reduce capacities and end coal by 2030 or 2035 latest. The energy sector has a maximum emission budget left, and this does not need to be exceeded because of the Paris target and the emission reductions we have to face. And the Coal Commission, just a few sentences on this, has a mandate, had a structure to include all different kind of people, representatives from the government, representatives from science, from religion, but also different stakeholders, NGOs, and discussed how to do it and how to manage the coal phase-out. 31 members were included into this, and they had a long debate. They had a strong debate on how to do it, and came up with a final report in January, and saying briefly this. So we need to, on the one hand, phase out coal. They recommended latest by 2035 or 2038, but also building a strong and sustainable regions by modernizing the energy regions, and these are the crucial energy regions, previously coal regions, by increasing infrastructure and research, and modernize the power and energy sector by increasing the share of renewable energy, and also they recommend also to increase some gas capacities. We have some doubts on that. We think renewables can make it alone, and also the vulnerable interest groups or vulnerable regions need to get some structural funds in order to prevent themselves. And also increase their jobs in those regions. And this is pretty much what they said should be done to go this line with the phase out and reach the overall target. And also, to our opinion, it's not enough just to define the coal phase out and say how this might be done. We now need the politicians to act, and that's quite soon. I've heard this morning they already said some sentences in Germany around this. I think that's very crucial, and we have different steps to face, and this is not a trivial task, but it's really important to bring this into the political debate and do the transformation away from coal towards a sustainable and reasonable investment towards more renewables, and this is our main aim for recommendation to the German government, really to go for this compromise. It has really a major conflict in Germany which has been solved by this, but it's not only solved by a coal phase out. It needs to be solved by a renewable phased in. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Definitely the best country, so to speak, to set the stage on this conversation, because it was obviously the biggest news coming out of sort of the renewable energy space in the last few weeks, months, I guess. I'm sure the colleagues on the stage will have some time to react to what Professor Kemfert have told us, but I'd like to start with you, Minister Jiménez. So, with the government of Chile and companies that own coal generation units, you've declared no new coal power plants. So that is obviously a very interesting move. You said no new power plants without carbon capture. I think that's the way you phased it. And these companies have additionally volunteered to start a process to define a voluntary schedule of a phase out. That's very interesting as well. So I'd like you to just take a few moments to outline, the Chilean approach.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks for this invitation. So we can share the Chilean experience with the rest of the panel. Chile is living a very large-scale transformation, energy transformation. We used to be a country which was very poor in energy sources. We had to import all our fossil fuels, and thanks to this very dramatic drop in technology reduction prices of renewable energy, we are now facing a situation which is very new. We are very, very rich in the energies of the present and of the future. You may know Chile has the highest irradiation in the northern part, so we have a big potential of solar energy, but also of wind energy. The first geothermal plant from Latin America is operating in our country, and we are constructing also the first concentrated solar power plant in the northern part, which will be operating by 2020. So we are now a rich country in energy sources, and we're living a natural process where we are replacing, or let's say all of the new investments today are almost all on renewable energy. 93% of the plants under construction today are of renewable energy. But still we have a compromise, an international compromise to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and that's why we want to accelerate this natural process, because energy used to be the problem, the main source of emissions, but today it arrives as the main contributor through decarbonization of not only our electric matrix, but also transportation. So what we have been doing is that we started with the voluntary agreement between the companies with coal-fired power plants and the Ministry of Energy, where, as you said, they compromised not to construct any further coal units unless they have capture and storage of CO2, and also to have a further agreement on a voluntary schedule of retirement and reconversion of coal-fired power plants. So we have been having a conversation, a roundtable with all those who have something to say in this process. This is not only an environmental issue, it's also a social issue, a labor source, and it has an economic impact, and for sure we had to be very responsible with the impact on the efficiency and the competitiveness of our electric system. So we are in that process. We have had these 7 sessions where we heard all of these perspectives, environmental, social, labor, security, economic point of views. And we have some preliminary conclusions. We are on our way to get to this agreement with each of the 4 companies that have coal power plants in Chile. But we do know that this is a gradual process. We need time to replace the coal generation, which is still very important in our matrix. We need to have an accompanying process to the occupational transition. And of course, we may need some adjustments so as to secure that this huge and increasing penetration of renewable energy is being done, taking care of the security and the efficiency of the electric system. And of course, decarbonization, as I said, is not just electric generation, it's also transportation, how we move to low-emission transportation, how we promote energy efficiency, how we can create new areas like green hydrogen. So there's still a lot to do, but I think we're on a good track. Thank you very
much. Now, I'm definitely hearing an approach where you are integrating all the issues, definitely putting a focus on what we heard this morning from President Mary Robinson about energy and energy transition itself being a human right, and making sure we don't have, understanding who the losers are and making sure that they're looked after and they're considered as we transition away from fossil fuels. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to turn to you, Lord Henley, and obviously you come from the UK, and the UK is definitely a global leader in the energy transition. What is the most important thing that has helped your country transition safely from coal to clean energy?
Linda, thank you very much. And thank you for reminding us that I think we can argue that the UK has been a leader in this process of transition. Just as sadly, we were the first into coal 250 years ago, and we saw the growth of coal in the Industrial Revolution, the growth of coal in our economy, to the stage where, by the beginning of the last century, something of the order of 1 million men were employed in the coal industry, and all our power was coming from coal. Since then, things have changed, and what I want to do is to speak briefly about the more recent part of that transition, and just how much we have to share with the rest of you in terms of our reduction in use of coal and what the process has been, because I think it has been a real success for the UK. Going back just a few years, 2012, we were still generating some 40% of our electricity from coal. By last year, 2018, we'd got that down to 5%. But in managing that change, this is the important thing, we've demonstrated that rapid transition away from coal is possible whilst maintaining economic growth and whilst maintaining security of supply, because I think it is of great importance that industry, our homes, can still be powered so that people can have warm homes, that industry can still operate. So what has driven that rapid transition? And there have been both social and environmental aspects at play. We have had to close uneconomic coal mines, for instance, and that has created very definite social problems. Gas from the United Kingdom continental shelf has become available since the 1980s, which has given us certain advantages. But more important, concerted government action to change the way we generate our energy has taken place, and we've created clear and ambitious targets. We've now committed to ending unabated coal power generation by 2025, and I think that provides certainty for all of those developing alternative technologies about future markets. Secondly, we have been successful in using financial incentives to move away from coal-generated power. For example, we've introduced the carbon price support mechanism, which is a tax levied on fossil fuels used to generate electricity, and that complements the EU's own emissions trading system. Thirdly, we've invested in the low-carbon technologies to drive innovation. We've committed £2.5 billion up to 2021 and placed clean growth at the heart of our industrial strategy that was published at the end of 2017, along with our clean growth strategy on producing energy. And we're particularly interested in the role that carbon capture, usage and storage, or CCUS, can play, as well as other technologies such as hydrogen, other forms of electricity storage, and gasification. Fourthly, and finally, we've made a real effort to support renewable energy sources, and this has driven down costs dramatically, allowing us to increase their use. And our offshore wind sector has been a particular success story, and we're now the largest offshore wind market in the world, followed closely by you in Germany. And next year we anticipate generating some 10% of our energy from offshore, and that's up from a mere 1% in 2010. And we've set a very ambitious target to generate a third of all our energy from offshore by 2030. Now, that is thanks to the hundreds of millions of pounds of investment in new technologies, leading to costs falling faster than we could have ever imagined. One's only got to look at the cost of offshore wind, how it has plummeted over the years, possibly making new investments in nuclear and other investments very, very difficult to ever justify. And it's a good example of the fact that countries don't need to choose between the idea of growth and a clean and green economy, because offshore wind has created thousands of jobs in the UK, and over the next decade, I believe it will create thousands more. And likewise, overall, we have slashed UK carbon emissions by some 40% since 1990, whilst again growing the whole economy by over two-thirds. It's only by achieving growth that we can achieve those cuts in carbon emissions and provide prosperity to our people. And I think that's one of the clearest and most positive messages other nations can take, certainly from our transition away from coal. It's possible to clean up your energy, and it's possible to be positive about it. And it's the best way to cut consumer bills, drive economic growth, and create high-value employment, whilst also improving the quality of life and helping in that international fight on climate change. Linda, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. But Henley, I'm just going to ask a quick follow-up question to your comments. And of the 35% reduction in coal, are you able to comment specifically how did that get distributed? Did 35% reduction in coal use, did all that get produced by offshore wind? Did you do hydro? How did that get absorbed?
We have obviously seen a growth in the use of gas. We are very lucky to have gas, but I think gas should be seen as part of that transition to clean growth, along with the growth in renewables. But at the same time, I think where we really do need to do the greatest research is renewables are going to work only when we've solved the problem of storage. And I think it's research into storage, research into hydrogen, and I've seen some wonderful examples all around the UK, particularly, if I can point to them, right up in the extreme north in Orkney, where there is a lot of academic research going on along with the people of Orkney into what they can do in terms of creating hydrogen from wind and how that hydrogen, as a means of storing energy, can be used. And I hope we will see further developments in that area. So gas must be seen as part of the transition to that clean growth, but certainly gas is a lot better than burning coal.
Thanks. We'll come back in our second round. So, Ms. Smith, the Just Transition Centre, which you are heading, was founded to secure the future and livelihoods of workers in the transition to a low-carbon economy through social dialogue process. And we started to have quite a bit of that, throughout the day to just make sure that there's inclusivity and it's a people-centered transition. What are your central learnings from exiting the coal process? And what have you accompanied in terms of ensuring, what have you accomplished, in terms of ensuring a low-carbon future while providing your perspective to those who are perceived as losers in the process? If we could sort of expound on that discussion that started early this morning.
Sure. So thank you very much. It's great to hear different perspectives on coal exit. I mean, the first thing I want to say is that we would never call any of our members losers.
Okay.
Right? Because these are people who have spent their lives, especially in coal mining, in dangerous jobs that have kept the lights on. And now there's no longer a need for the particular thing that they've been doing, but that would not necessarily make them a loser. Just a small point. I think the single biggest thing the biggest lesson that we're getting from these different energy transition processes is that if we only talk about coal exit, we've already lost. So it's a transition out of coal, yes, but it's a transition to other forms of energy and even to other sectors of the economy. And so if you want this to be successful, as opposed to leaving deindustrialized regions full of dissatisfied people or unemployed people or people who are suffering financially or for other reasons, you have to put at least as much emphasis on the new jobs. So what are the plans going to be for workers? What will the plans and investments be for regions that today depend on coal? And you have to do at least as much of that as you do shutting stuff down. Because if transition is only about ending industries and losing jobs, we're not really going to succeed at getting emissions down, and we will also increase the amount of political volatility that we see, at least in Western countries today. And this is also why the German Commission's agreement is so important. And here I just want to echo a bit of what you said, Professor. It's really groundbreaking, because the basis for that agreement, which was negotiated with trade unions at the table, and indeed they pushed for a commission like this, is that it ensures that there is a path for every single worker, either to a new good job or to retirement. And it also ensures a new life for the coal-dependent regions, some of which have had no major infrastructure investment for the last few decades. The second lesson, at least from a labor perspective, is that you need organized labor to manage these transitions. First, because shutting stuff down is a tough process for the workers involved. Someone needs to help workers accept change, negotiate for their interests as a group, and make sure that no one is left behind, and then socialize the agreement and monitor its implementation, which is now happening in Germany, right? The mining and energy unions are going from works council to works council and explaining to members, this is what's been negotiated, this is what it means for you, these are the next steps. We have agreed this as in a democratic process. And that is really the job of unions. But the flip side of it is that when you're building new sectors, such as offshore wind, you also need unions. I spent 2 hours today talking to a senior person from the UK renewables industry, and the entire discussion was about skills. Well, part of it was about skills, and part of it was about all of the issues with labor standards in UK renewables right now. So that's everything from wages to health and safety to certifications. And one way to get a large workforce with training, certification, and skills that can work at multiple job sites, that can help you work out health and safety issues, that is also the job of unions. So 2 quick last things. I mean, we're seeing now in Canada, in Germany, in Spain, in the Netherlands, that you can get agreements for just transition that are comprehensive and that cover the interests of workers and to some extent communities in closing down coal mines and coal-fired power. It's possible, and at a very large scale here in Germany. It's harder to get agreements that create new jobs and are going to renew regions, but that is happening as well, and not only in Germany. There are a growing number of countries that are taking this approach of just transition to their energy transition, but also to other sectors, because it is coming not only to the power sector, but it's coming to every other sector as well, just not as quickly.
Thank you. Excellent. I appreciate that. Now. So finally, to you, Minister Turmes, you've heard a lot from the other panelists, from a Luxembourg perspective, but also from a European perspective. What are the opportunities of exit coal scenarios, and how can innovation drive the process?
So, Luxembourg never had a lot of coal, so I cannot contribute a lot as minister from Luxembourg. What I can contribute is having been 20 years in the European Parliament. Mm-hmm. And so the real success story behind the British offshore wind was a binding renewable target for UK in 2009, which there was a lot of opposition at that time, but without a binding renewable target in the Renewable Directive of 2009, I'm pretty sure UK would never have moved in such a vigor into offshore wind. And then with the years and the learning curves, and I think you were the first to have competitive bidders, tenders, so that was really bringing down the costs. So there was an aggressive phase-in of renewables through the legislation. And what we achieved recently in Europe on the, what we call the clean energy packages, new targets for renewables in 2030, energy efficiency targets for 2030, but equally important, we have introduced at European scale an environmental performance standard of 550 gram per kilowatt hour, which means it's virtually impossible to build any new coal power plant in Europe. And I hope that you understand the magnitude of our win when we imposed that against a lot of opposition from certain countries which are still in coal. And what is always surprising for me in the German discussion is the problem of the big amount of coal in Germany was not necessarily only German politics. It was the failure of an EU ETS cap and trade policy only. Already in 2012, it was crystal clear that there were so many loopholes in the system that the price of the CO2 certificates would go down to below 10. And so it was evident that gas was largely available. Gas power plants in Europe would not run because they would be basically pushed out from the merit order by cheap coal. And that was the coal basically boom in whole Europe and especially in Germany. So what is important is that this market only failed in Europe, and we basically needed a very aggressive, in a certain sense, legislation. And the one pity in the discussion now, I think in Germany or in Western Europe, is the one thing which UK really got right was the carbon floor price, which is, I would say, for liberal or neoliberal economics, it's horror. It's a massive market intervention because you put a floor price into a market. But it was this, I would say, this surprisingly unideological position in British politics to get a carbon floor price. And now my biggest fight in this moment is getting a carbon floor price at least for Western Europe. Because that could accelerate the coal phase out. And it's a bit unfortunate that the German politics have now chosen huge cash to close down coal instead of a system which would be a bit more British style of this kind of carbon floor price. A carbon floor price for Western Europe would probably have driven coal even faster out. So we have to be tough on coal, and we have to prevent any new coal investments in Europe. But, and I like very much your intervention, we have to be extremely respectful for any person who has worked in coal. It's a tough job, it's a dangerous job. So these people have often paid their lives, and these regions, we have to help them. And therefore, the other thing where I'm quite proud of is that we got in a collective work between the European Parliament, some member states, and the European Commission, a coal transition or an energy transition fund where we help now financially Silesia to move out of coal, where we help parts of Bulgaria to move out, where we will help Greece to transition. And that is what is really important. And it's more than money. It's also about having a pool of experts all over Europe and also maybe sometimes flying in some world experts on what are concrete ideas for a region which was in coal. Because it's more than money. You need also to know what do you do now in this region. And very important, and I like that part of the German coal agreement, you have to strengthen civil society. When you tell a region where you were in, where what you were used to is over. If you go to a person and you say it's what you have done for the last 30 or maybe 200 years is over, you risk to be in a depression. You can have collective depression, I think. So you need to trigger a positive social mood in these regions, and I think that's our damned duty to do it. Yeah. And to finish, I think that Fatih Birol has said something very important this moment. We need a sense of urgency, not only to move quicker into renewables. We need a sense of urgency to close down coal power plants which are hardly 5 or 8 or 10 or 15 years old. And that puts, I think, on the agenda of the international climate negotiations. If we want coal power plants in Indonesia to be closed down, and I think we have to, because otherwise we are just cheating ourselves, somebody must put money on the table. The problem today is no more on paying for renewables, because they are damn cheap, and that's our success. Solar, in Africa, you get it. You put a bit of de-risking money, it will fly. Everywhere, wind will fly. Everywhere, offshore wind will fly. The money is, I think, today needed to help certain countries, certain regions, to dare to phase out existing coal. That is what we will have to do. Thank you very much.
No. No, thank you very much for those interventions. I think I'm just getting a theme of our conference here. Number one, political will. You know, I'm really getting that was echoed by the audience in the previous poll. We're hearing our experts, people who've definitely put a lot of thought into this subject, that we have to decide as a society, politically, have the legislation and really go after it. So that's the first thing that I'm hearing. Secondly, I'm hearing there's investment that is required. And thirdly, I'm also hearing that the people side of it, you know, the human side of it has to be front and centered. We have to consider all the stakeholders as we are transitioning away from coal and certainly other fossil fuels, right? But that's kind of what I'm getting from the discussion right now. But I want us to really bring you in as the audience, and if you haven't participated already, I feel inclined to discuss the questions with you, because the second part of this panel, we are going to be responding to your thoughts as per the poll. So before I call Mr. Dialogue here, the questions that we're asking are, in your opinion, what are the most important aspects in the exit coal discussion? Are we talking about reduction in CO2 emissions? Are we talking about endangerment of jobs, as we've just heard? Are we talking about intervention in nature through coal mining or strengthening of renewable energies? What is the most important aspect in your opinion? The other question, I think, is an interesting one. It's a simple yes or no answer. Would you be prepared to pay a higher price, a higher electricity price for exiting coal? So this brings down to the challenge that we were given this morning. What are you doing personally to help the energy transition? And then finally, talking to the urgency, right? We've just heard that UK did it in 5 years. So our question to you is, in which period do you consider a coal exit compatible and realizable? I think that's an interesting one. So if you haven't participated, I've made it easy for you. Please get onto the QR code as I call my colleague, Mr. Dialogue, to help us continue.
I thought we had agreed on Dr. Dialogue.
No,
okay.
no, you've got to earn the PhD. You've got to earn it.
All right, thank you. So everyone is now familiar with the QR code. I would like to switch over to some tweets before we take a look at the results there. Some of you might be familiar with Euractiv, another website where you can get a lot of good news. And one thing that I learned from them today was that we have people here from more than 50 countries, which is quite impressive. Johannes Uhl has written that the coal exit has many co-benefits, citing Claudia Kemfert. And if you're not sure what co-benefits are, there's a booth over here. There's a bunch of booths out there. I hope you're visiting those as well. The IASS has a booth over there, and they have tweeted about co-benefits, so you can go ask them if you're not sure what that is, and they can tell you all about it. Eike Weber is here. He used to direct Fraunhofer ISE, so it's Europe's largest photovoltaics or solar energy. Oh, there he is, waving up to us. And he also agrees that there's a lack of a sense of urgency among some of the speakers here. And finally, I have a tweet to Linda. I don't know if you can see this, but she's got a stack of cards, and that's just for this panel. She's got a stack for every panel. She did her homework. She's got like questions for every person for the whole 2 days. She must have written a book just preparing for all of this. And she's not only got this microphone on, but she's got an earpiece. I don't know if you can see that, so that somebody over here can whisper into her ear, Linda, speed it up, we're behind schedule. And during all of that, she has to concentrate on what they're saying. So I would like to quote Tina Barroso here, who basically says, Linda, thanks for the great moderation.
Aww.
Thank you very much.
Oh, bless.
All right. I'm not quite finished, though.
Thank you very much.
Not quite finished, though. Now I need the little clicker thing.
While he gets his clicker, it would be remiss of me to take all the credit. There was a team that prepared me.
Wow.
The team from BSW and everywhere else, they prepared me. So really, it really is a team effort, and we will recognize them a bit more tomorrow. Thank you very much.
All right, so let's see what the results are here. I can barely read the fine print there. So the most important aspect in the coal exit discussion is the reduction of carbon emissions in this group's opinion. Some people are still voting, but we'll continue. Would you be prepared to pay a higher electricity price for exiting coal? Almost all of you would. But when I saw this question, I thought, yeah, we have the money, most of us, right?
Yeah.
The real challenge is, as we've also heard up here, what about the people who aren't doing so well? And finally, in which period do you consider a coal exit compatible or realizable? About 50% within the next 10 years. All right, so we have some results there. I'll pass that on to the panel, and
Yes.
thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dialogue. Thank you. So panel, at this point, I'm really going to put it out to the floor to react to the poll, what you're hearing, to some of the tweets, and to also underscore perhaps a comment you've heard from your colleagues, continue the discussion about the experiences from your own country. So I want us to interact with each other, make it a bit more lively. But I do want to start with you, Professor Kemfert, around what you've just heard from the audience.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. So just as I said in the very beginning, I think the coal exit strategy now in Germany is one example how to also solving a major conflict with the different social groups. And you already mentioned that hard workers, the coal jobs are very important. But as I said, we already have done a structural change. We started with 600,000 people in those areas, especially in North Rhine-Westphalia, that's in Western Germany, and have done sometimes very good, sometimes a little bit, could be improved, a structural change in those areas. But now we have the situation in Eastern Germany where structural lacks, and there are some areas where people do not really find a job. They have really difficulties in finding a new job. And this is to answer Claude's comment that we have to spend money for those areas where they have to be improved infrastructure, where they need some financial payments also for improving the situation, bringing attractive situations to companies, to those people in order to really improve the situation for new and innovative jobs in transition. And renewable energy for sure is one part of it, but it's also research and development. We need innovation in those areas, and also energy efficiency improvement. Hydrogen has been mentioned, new storage options. There's a lot of research ongoing in these areas as well. And this is why it's so important to focus on both. On the one hand, how to reduce emissions, how to change the energy system towards more renewables, less coal, but also bringing the sectors together with renewables, also not only in the electricity, but also mobility and building sector. And on the other hand, how to increase the jobs and innovation. And we are talking about the social implications, and I think both could be perfectly included in a coal phase-out strategy if we are doing it in a clever way. And Germany, of course, could have done a floor price on CO2, but this would have been enormously high, to 40 to 60 euros per ton of CO2, which we would have never seen. But right now, they could have started earlier and really doing the coal phase out and also offering opportunities, innovations to the most affected regions. So I think it's a combination, not only to improving the situation for companies for investment, but also for R&D and innovation. And here in the eastern part in Germany, we have, and we could look at all over the world, I think, and in almost all areas where coal mining is happening, to bring new jobs, to bring new innovation, to really go for those regions who are affected most and offer opportunities. And we in Germany, of course, we could offer those. And I think this Coal Commission has done a tremendous job in offering those opportunities. But now the politicians have to react as well. So I think it could be a role model for the world if we do it right. It could be not a role model if we are messing it up. So I think it would be now a good chance really to show that we could do a coal phase out.
No, Fantastic. Well, thank you for that. I just want to bring in an aspect here that we touched on at the beginning, but I really want us to deep dive. And I'm going to be, maybe I'm going to just be a little bit vulnerable here. The second question, would you pay more for green electricity? It's interesting to me that it was probably obvious for this audience. You're like, yeah, of course I will. But I don't know that I will. I live in Kenya. I already pay 20, 30 cents a kilowatt hour for unreliable electricity that goes down. So that is not a very obvious answer for me, and I obviously represent maybe a certain economic class, so I cannot think of my brothers and sisters back in Kenya who would say, of course I'm going to pay more for green electricity because I understand the implications and things like that. So obviously there's an awareness piece, and there's all that, but at the end of the day, affordability is critical, right? Though you cannot sell expensive things to poor people, and I'm not suggesting that Africa as a bloc is poor, but if I have to think twice about whether I would, without a thought, pay for more expensive electricity, you know, how do we think about that? Because we are thinking about a transition, remember, that leaves no one behind. We talked about 51% of unelectrified people in our continent. We talked about 3 billion people who do not have access to cooking energy. We talked about 1.3 billion people around the globe that do not have access to energy. So affordability is something that we really cannot skimp if we are serious about a just transition. Perhaps Minister Jiménez did want to say something.
Okay, thank you.
And then we'll go over to you, Lord Henley.
I want to take your words because I think even if we have all a common objective, which is decarbonization, in this case, one size doesn't fit all. We have different contexts, different conditions. For example, you had gas for your transition. We don't. We do have renewable energy. That's a blessing. We do have 40% of our matrix with coal-fired power plants, which is not very usual. It's quite high. It's like yours, but not the average of the alliance for phase out of coal. We have a park that is of plants, of carbon units, that is 12 years old. Not 45 like UK, not 25 like Germany. And I don't think that everybody can afford to pay more. So even if I agree that decarbonization, the main objective must be to reduce emission, that's why we're talking about this, it's inevitable to say that there are so many interrelated elements, labor and how to reconvert people in other activities. How does this affect the efficiency of the system, meaning prices, competitiveness of poorer countries? How do we consider that not all countries have the same electricity intensity use? Because it's different to reduce intensity and be efficient when you have double, twice, 4 times, 10 times the consumption of other countries. So I think the objective is the same, but there is not a unique path, not a unique speed to reach the objectives where we all want to go. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, could I just add one thing? We're all agreed, all of us in this room, about the absolute fundamental importance of reducing emissions.
Yes.
We are not going to persuade the public, the consumer, everybody else who isn't in this room about the virtues of that by increasing the cost of energy.
Yep.
And if one thing that is going to put people off, it's suddenly having to pay more, and then they are more likely to listen to siren voices saying, this is not necessary, this change is not happening. So we have a duty, obviously, to try to subsidize some forms of renewable energy, try to put money into research so that we can see that continuing process that we have seen with the costs I just mentioned offshore wind, where the cost has plummeted. But I think the same is true of solar, not something that the United Kingdom is ever going to be completely dependent on solar, but other countries will have an interest in solar. But again, we have seen the price of solar come down as greater use of it's been made by a means of subsidies by governments in one form or another. But it won't happen if the individual consumer is going to have to pay more. At the same time, we also, and this is where government intervention will be necessary, we will have to, and that's why I mentioned the 2 billion or so that we're putting in these things, to put money into means of storing electricity, because quite obviously renewables, most renewables, are fairly intermittent and don't work. So more has to be done in terms of storage. That might mean more has to be done in hydrogen. I'm a believer that hydrogen might be the future for storage. But more has to be done, for example, in making our grids, both within country and across borders, smarter in terms of moving electricity around so that we'll use it more efficiently. There are a whole host of areas where we can make progress. We can use our energy more effectively. We've all seen that over generations. With each new car we buy, it is more efficient than the previous one, just as our aeroplanes get more efficient. We in the UK, I know, could do a great deal more about insulating a lot of our domestic housing, so we use less electricity. And I admire what the position Germany has got to, where I have to say insulation is much better. And as a result, I think people, well, it's certainly much better, I can say, than the United Kingdom. A little bit. But anyway, all of us can make progress in that field. But I don't think we should think we can solve the problem by saying, I want to pay more for my electricity, because people will not like that, and people will be turned off the whole greater aim of reducing our carbon footprint.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Appreciate that comment for sure.
So, as you said, the point of a just transition is not just that it benefits workers, but also that it alleviates poverty. And poverty is a structural issue. So it's not a question about the willingness of individuals to pay or not pay, as we were commenting on the poll, but it is also about what the power sector, what options they have if they have access to energy, whether they are priced out of access to energy, what kinds of incomes people have, and it's also about the systemic issue of tax and income distribution. Yeah. So, for example, in many countries, you have an extractive sector which has extracted labor and commodities from the country over a period of decades or sometimes a century or more. And that means that there are pockets of wealth in that sector, for example, in the mining sector or in the oil and gas sector, but it's not distributed amongst the people who are living in the country. So some of these issues about the price of energy are also issues about the fair distribution of, first of the benefits of resource extraction, but also of the benefits of access to power. I'm thinking about this in particular because I recently returned from South Africa, where you have a mining and industrial complex that uses 60+% of the country's electricity. You still have, despite some very good efforts by the government, a large number of people, especially in rural areas, who do not have access to electricity. And then you have a group of people who have recently, since the fall of apartheid, gotten access to electricity, but now the price is shooting up. Yep. Right? And so in that situation, you know, some of the questions that you might need to ask, and I just say this as an observer, are who is benefiting or extracting value from this electricity, who is making the most profit from it and therefore could probably pay the most to transform the system or to maintain it, and who needs income redistribution in order to be able to afford electricity, which is a right.
Yep.
Right? So those would be some of the questions you would also have to look at in the just transition of the power sector, the issues for workers, for communities, because one road for people out of poverty is actually decent jobs, but also these issues about fair tax and fair distribution of revenues.
Thank you. Very thoughtful. No, thank you very much. So would you like to add to that?
So I don't like these kind of questions. Do you want to pay more for organic or for having a clean world? At the end of the day, and I may be a bit radical, climate change is not the hobby of some mueslis. Sorry, it is the biggest societal challenge for all of us. And the second thing, which I think we have an economic system in which pollution is not paying. So I will never have an as low kilowatt-hour price as coming from a coal-driven system, which didn't pay for asthma and others. So I'm a bit cautious to get public attention fixed on price per kilowatt-hour electricity. Because we will lose. It's impossible to do the energy transition out of heavy coal. You will have to increase your price per kilowatt hour. Come on, I have some economics. It's not possible. So what we have to do is, and by the way, I don't think that will have such a large impact. All studies I have seen, there is energy poverty. Often energy poverty is poverty full stop. So I think we need to do anti-poverty policies. And then when you look, the biggest energy poverty is not in electricity consumption. It is in transport. Poor people have no car, no money to pay a car. So public transport, maybe free public transport, that's more important for energy poverty. And then the second biggest issue is bad insulated houses. And what is our problem? Most of our energy efficiency policies, at least in Europe, is done for upper middle class people who read very complicated messages on internet, where we say to them, oh, go and insulate, and who have cash on the shelf. Poor people don't have cash on the shelf. So what we need, if we are really serious about energy poverty, and I have won the battle in Europe, in the new governance regulation, where I was the rapporteur, every country in Europe will have to, in its national energy and climate plan, needs a chapter on energy poverty. So we will force governments to report, and then what I hope to get out of that is targeted energy efficiency policies for those low-income population who don't have money to renovate their buildings. We need these people will never be able to renovate a building out of themselves. Mm-hmm. So I think energy poverty is too serious to just be a bit of a slogan. You need to dig deeper into it. Yeah. And I don't know, do we get the third round, or is that my last? Because I have one other important message.
I will definitely give you your parting shot, so I will give you another chance, sir.
Then I stop here.
No, that is fine. So I just, again, so our poll questions, obviously, I designed to bring certain aspects, right? So the first one, I just want to echo what Lord Henley said. The people in this room, it was so obvious that the number one thing you do about exiting coal is reducing CO2 emissions. Very obvious. In another forum, you know, the second aspect, the endangerment of jobs, which is also we've talked about, would be the number one aspect of it, So providing a bit of a disconnect in alignment and motivations there. So I just wanted to make that as a comment. We've obviously talked about the affordability thing, which sort of captured the second poll question. So I want to frame the third poll question for a discussion, and then we'll go into our lightning round. I was a little surprised because this, of all audiences, has read or has an understanding of the IPCC report that says we've got how many years? 12 years before climate change is irreversible. I'm getting some signals there. There's a gentleman who's understanding what I'm saying. And yet we're saying, yeah, we'll take 10 years to exit coal, right? And we also saw Mr. Birol's presentation this morning that says if we can just look at the emissions for the already installed factories and users, if we just look at that, then we're going to make a lot more progress. But here we are in a room of experts and highly influential people that think we actually have 10 years to exit coal, and it's not more urgent than we might think, and might look at the example from the UK. So so why do we still think we have time? I don't understand that. Why is this not an urgent issue? Anybody?
It's really urgent, and I think you see some of the urgency reflected in the fact that you have countries or provinces that are basically shutting down stuff that is still commercially viable, right? So we are at a point where renewable energy is cheaper. We do have issues with storage. There are some issues with grid improvement. But nonetheless, if you're looking at the total cost, it's probably easier to keep some of these plants running or more commercially reasonable to do it than to shut them down and build new stuff. And that is one indicator of the urgency. I would say from a labor movement perspective, the other indicator of urgency is probably the absolute worst part of being a union leader is telling people that they're going to lose their jobs, or their jobs are going to disappear, or their jobs are going to change very substantially, and maybe not for the better. And yet, at least my job, I daily meet union leaders who are ready to take on the hard discussion about the energy transition or transition in other sectors. It is coming. It is very urgent. Some of the speed we do not control, but it is much better to be a part of the discussion, to be at the negotiating table, and to be able to get good jobs and futures for our members than it is to, get the short end of the deal once the decision is made. So is it fast enough? It depends how fast we go in other sectors, but so far we're not moving fast enough. I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah.
Now we really need to act faster, for sure. So we have lost 20 years of discussion, and here's the problem, because we have a global problem, but we need local solutions. And this is why it's so difficult to find a way out of it. And in those countries like Germany, which have a really large share of coal, we all have the debate about affordability, about jobs, about social aspects, and you need this time for discussion, and you need the time for solutions. And but at the end of the day, we all have to act. The good thing here is that renewables become cheaper and cheaper, and that's the question to the affordability as well. Because for poor households, most often gas and oil is much more expensive than renewables. And this is true not only in Germany, this is true for all other nations of the world. Solar energy is becoming cheaper and cheaper. In Africa, you can use solar everywhere. And here also new jobs are created. Affordability is solved. So I think we have the solution ready on the table, which is renewables, and just go for it. And we need the framework for that, and don't wait for global nations, for all the global carbon price or whatever is mentioned, we can act now. And that's not so complicated just to change, but the economics are very clear that renewables are becoming cheaper and cheaper, and the investment will go into it. The framework in the individual markets needs to be adjusted, that the investment can be made and market barriers are removed, and that's pretty much it. But then we can go for it, and that's a good, I would say it's a good message to all of us that we have the solution on the table.
Okay. Thank you. Lord Henley, did you have anything to add, having heard all these interventions, as we're sort of coming to the last little section of our panel here?
And it comes down to that question as to whether we think, following the most recent report of the IPCC, whether we are going fast enough. I can obviously only talk about what we've achieved in the UK and hope that that gives an indication of encouragement we would like to give to the rest of the world. Yes, we have made considerable progress. Yes, we would like to do more. I can just add for Claude, who suggested this was as a result of the directive in 2009, remind him that we did a year earlier, in 2008, pass our Climate Change Act, one of those rare acts of Parliament, you might find it difficult to believe in current circumstances, where we had all parties on side. That act went through and imposed binding targets on the United Kingdom government, of whatever persuasion it was, that have since been followed by the then Labour government, by the following coalition government, now by the current Conservative government, targets taking us up to 2030, which we're on the way to meeting, difficult though they might be, and we want to then look at those and decide what the target should be to take us on to 2050 and get down to, say, 80% of where we were in 1990. We are making progress, we want to do more, and we want to encourage more. I think we have to do a lot of that by what I've been talking about, seeing to developments in renewables. Some of those we might find we go down the wrong path. Not every renewable turns out to be as good as another. Also looking at that crucial question of storage of electricity, which I think is the vital one to get renewables working. And again, it might be we go down the wrong route in that. I do not know. I just happen to think that hydrogen is possibly the way we can do that. But always remember, everyone makes mistakes. Some things will be wrong, but in the end, we will get to the right conclusion, and we will get to something that provides us with cheaper and more reliable and cleaner power for our people, for their homes, and for the industry that we need for growth.
Excellent. Excellent. Did you want to add to that before I hand it over to Minister Turmes?
Yes, just to have some cautions, because it's not that there is not an urgency on looking for a solution for the climate impact, the climate change impact, but there are some restrictions, and that may be what delays the change. Of course, renewable energy, fortunately, are very cheap and very competitive, but still you have to replace the whole coal-fired power plant generation with new investments in new generation. But not only that, you also need to have more transmission infrastructure, which not always is so easy. I live in a very thin and long country where our potential is in the north, and we need to bring it to the south. Mm-hmm. And that means lines that are over 1,000 kilometers. So you need to have that infrastructure, because you don't only need to replace the generation, but also you have to bring it to the consumer centers. So there's where, on the one side, I see an opportunity for collaboration. If we want to have a faster transition in other countries and probably in less developed countries, there must be an international collaboration. And also, I think we have to work. On one side, I totally agree on research, which will allow this progress, because at the end, what really made the change was this marvelous reduction of prices of renewable energies. We didn't have feed-in tariffs. We are grateful that you did, so that we could take advantage of that technology for very competitive prices now. But we do need to have more research, because we also have to deal with the variable generation of this kind of sources, like wind and solar photovoltaic. And we need more storage, we need water pumping, we need other technologies that can join this variable generation and allow us to do that transition as fast as possible. But I do have to sign out, we have these restrictions which we need to deal with. And certainly I also think we have to work on economic instruments which let us trade emission reductions, so that we can, again, help those countries who don't have maybe the resources, and that we all achieve these emission reductions in the world, but by financing other projects in other parts of the world. Thank you.
Fantastic. Before I hand it over to you, I just have to comment that I've learned so much today in terms of, I guess, the different challenges based on the geography of the different countries. We heard from the Maldivian minister. He's talking about a country that's 3 miles top to bottom. We heard from the Chinese minister that he's talking about transmitting 5,000 kilometers top to bottom. And now we're learning about Chile. That's talking about transmitting for, 10,000 miles. Very, very interesting. Indeed, one size does not fit all. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think your question was, why didn't we grasp that we had to go faster? For me personally, the moment was, I would say, 2-3 years ago, when I ran for the Greens in the European Parliament a scenario based for the first time on the carbon budget. I think what we really have to understand is, climate is about volume of greenhouse gases emitted. So you don't grasp anything as long as you do not put numbers on what is the budget you are still allowed to spend. And in that sense, I think the UK politics was very early on the right track. And now, I think the good thing is, again, in this governance regulation, we pushed European Commission to define a carbon budget for Europe. What is left? And then you see that you can't fly flat and then deep quickly. That is not sustainable. So you understand you have to do early. And the other important thing is we have to do backcasting scenarios from net zero. And of course, today we speak about 2050. Sometimes I'm not sure if 2050 is really if we can go to as long as that. And you have to do backcasting to understand that, for example, on car industry, we will have to phase out fossil cars probably in 2030, because they have a 20 years lifetime. So it's about everybody needs a carbon budget, and everybody needs to do backcasting. I think otherwise the society and policymakers will not understand the urgency. Luckily, we have now pushed at least European countries into that. The good news is, and I think Claudia has mentioned it, we have managed, so all the solutions get cheap. PV is cheap, offshore wind is cheap, onshore wind is cheap, LED is cheap, EV batteries, so batteries will make that electric cars will be cheap. So, and that is what is encouraging. And so maybe we lost some time, but the good news is now we are in a situation to move quick. And of course, grid building takes time, but then we can learn from certain countries, and we have for example, batteries can replace some line buildings. So what the good news is we can move quick. And then we have one last really big problem. That's the financial community. Yeah. It's the banks who make the world move into coal or out of coal. So we have banks like the Asian Development Bank, which is not very clear where they stand on coal. I find it a bit strange that we have a G20 in Japan, and of course we can have discussions on hydrogen with Japan. I think the discussion on the G20 has to be no export credit agency, and even not the Japanese, anymore allowed to sponsor coal power plants. That is the decisive G20 discussion which has been. And so we really need, and I say it coming from, my biggest footprint in Luxembourg is not ArcelorMittal and not a Cargolux or whatever. It's my financing center in Luxembourg. We are like London, like Zurich, like Dublin. We are $1 trillion or euro or yuan collecting machines. It's our damned duty to change these financial centers from black into green. And I think that's something which we have to move still on.
Brilliant. Tough act to follow. So I am just going to call. No, what can I say? I completely 100% agree. So one last time, I'm going to ask Mr. Dialogue to come and let us know what is out on Twitter. This is the last session of the day. And then we will close very quickly with a lightning round. So think about what do you want the audience to go out with? They attended the exit call, challenges and solution. I think that's what we're called. Managing the socio-economic implications of exit call strategies. So your final round on your parting thoughts, and then we're going to go and have our evening reception. So Mr. Dialogue, what is the world telling us?
Well, we have Mr. Fatih Birol, who has had a great exchange on developments in the regional and global landscape, meeting with Simonetta Simagura, as we saw earlier on today. She was on one of our panels here. And we also have, let's see, we have the World Energy Council also talking about sector coupling, and Tuga is talking to us about that as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, so the last sort of round, you know, your parting shots for the day, and then I will explain the evening program. Okay, starting with Professor Kemfert, and then we'll go right down the seating.
Thanks so much. I very much appreciated this discussion, so it was very enjoyable to stay here and discuss with you about the coal phase-out. So I'm pretty much sure that Germany is now in the focus of showing that the coal phase-out in Germany is feasible. We can make it by clear signals. We have the coal committee giving a report and giving recommendations. We should now let the politicians act in Germany and make a good deal out of it, go for structural changes as innovation in those regions mostly affected, and we have the sector coupling heard, we have the social economic implications, and you can combine all of this because the solutions are not only technological with renewable energy and sector coupling and storage, what we have heard, but also to bring the people on board. And here, I think in those areas, especially in Eastern Germany, it's quite crucial to have a narrative and to show the people that there are solutions, there are new jobs. We go not only for climate protection, but we go for a future that is sustainable. And here we could be a role model for the world in bringing those technologies in and bringing also the people on board and show that it's feasible. And I think the answer, again, is not only phase out coal, it's a phase in renewables. And that's a sustainable transition. We can show and also make a successful way out of it. And thanks again for having me here.
Thank you. Phase out coal and phase in renewables. Yeah, your parting shot, Minister Jiménez.
Well, thank you very much. It's a privilege to be here with you and listen to other experiences. I would like to emphasize what I said before. There's no single path, although we are all walking into the same direction. I think there are, anyway, some transversal lessons that we can identify. I think gradualism is important. All countries have done it, and sometimes we want to go faster. We have to be responsible, especially with the security of the system, of the electric system, and the multiple interrelated elements that have to be considered by deciding our own pathway. Undoubtedly, the renewable energies are the future. We have to look for further applications, not only in electric generation, also in heating and cooling, and in industrial uses. And so I think there's a promising future. And I'm glad that we are all speaking the same language in that direction. Thank you.
Fantastic. Many, many factors to go into this transition. So.
Well, thank you very much. I agree with both of those interventions. I'm almost tempted to add, let 1,000 flowers bloom, but I think I might be misunderstood in using a Maoist comment of that sort. But I certainly think it is right and proper that we look at a whole range of different alternatives in renewables, because this is one where one size does not fit all. There are a whole lot of options according to which country you are, whether you have a continental shelf and therefore offshore wind makes sense, or whether onshore is more appropriate, whatever. Those are just examples. Similarly, there will be a whole range of different options for storage of electricity. Some countries will have the option of using pumped hydro to store it, others won't. It again depends on the shape of their country and what they've got. There is much that we can do. There's a great deal of research that we as governments must also commit to, and I give my commitment that we will continue with that. But I think that last point that I wanted to make is how vital it is, and I think I'm echoing both of you here, is that this is something that we must take people with us on, and go back to that original question about would you be happy to see the cost of your energy go up? It is all fine and dandy for people like us to say it will go up, but if we lose the support of other people in our own countries or other people throughout the world, we are not going to win the hearts and minds to win the battle against climate change. So thank you.
I agree. Yes. Brilliant.
Yes. So one thing we haven't discussed, which is I think is quite important not only for the agreement in Germany but elsewhere, is that we're able to find democratic solutions to some very difficult problems. And I just want to echo something I've heard from my German union sisters and brothers, is that the agreement in the German Coal Commission is also a victory for democracy. That you've managed to land a difficult, maybe intractable problem in a way that combines a lot of different interests. The second thing that we have discussed a little bit is that we actually need much better jobs in renewables than the ones we have today. Because if you want to persuade people that it's okay to phase out one high-emitting industry and phase in another, then the job quality has to be equivalent. Right? Otherwise, it's a very difficult argument to make. So we need better labor standards in renewables, and we could get them. And the last two things are that in the labor movement, we like to say that there are no jobs on a dead planet, but also that we must leave no one behind. Mm-hmm. And we're starting to get evidence from these different processes, not only in Germany, but in Canada, Spain, the Netherlands, and elsewhere, that in fact you can have both things. You can have good jobs on a living planet, and you can also leave no one behind.
Yes. Wow. Go on.
I think it's a good moment to move. Technologies there, we have, I think, a big amount of political experience in this country, in that country, on how we move forward. And it's of course always important to keep this. It's not about only political majorities, it's about societal majorities to move the show. And then I would say, let's be impatient optimists. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Would you join me in thanking the panel? Yeah.